Good morning. This is a recorded demonstration of the alpha test version of Leaf Hypercube. Leaf stands for Logical Enterprise Architecture Framework, and Hypercube is an application using that framework to manage the data of enterprise architecture. The data of enterprise architecture is usually a larger percentage of the problem than the production of pretty artifacts once you have the data. It's up to 80% of the problem, so from our figures. And this is one application in a suite of applications to do that, to manage that data. During a full login, we have to identify which database we're using, and then we see the standard help screen here, and then we can log in. Now I have already logged in, so it knows who I am. My window user credentials have not changed, so it recognizes me and passes me through. If you are not recognized, you have to enter your initials and password. Here it's identifying that the work context is changing. Here it's the initial work context when we're starting up. And then we get a display showing a Zachman-Like-Matrix. Now this is the most famous, the first and the greatest of them all, the Zachman framework for enterprise architecture. But this is not the only one we can use. Let me show you, for instance, in security. Here is the again, we're changing context, the ZMatrix. And again, this is all test data. And you can also do such things as use a matrix to manage your portfolios, programs, projects, and tasks or sprints. And the bottom row will track how far you are on acquiring that. The top row will identify the executive commitments and the executive environment that these initiatives are supposed to fulfill. Let me go back to the Zachman-Matrix. That's mostly present, configured. So we'll go there. Okay. Now, you can do several things from this screen. For instance, if you have configuration privileges, you can configure the matrix and put things into the various descriptive boxes on the form. You can also identify if you want an extra column, an extra row, or if you want to not use this particular matrix in your business environment. You can do that, and that will declutter the menus. You can also change the properties of a column, the properties of a row, and here in the cell, if I hit Control, hold down Control and hit that, I get the cell properties. If I want to identify which data I'm going to contain in a cell, or change that, oops, excuse me, this opens a particular artifact. Here are all the kinds of data contained in each cell. Let me show you what I mean. In this cell, if I don't hold down Control or Alt or Shift, I get the inventory types, which is the kind of data contained in this cell. But this is configurable. So if you had, for example, you had a bunch of inventories of existing operational equipment that you wanted to track in your enterprise architecture, well, you could do that. Here's a somewhat complex example. Here are all the 0 clients, all the Windows servers, the switches, the routers, the Linux servers, hyperconverged platforms, firewalls, assemblies, and network appliances. If you wanted to track desktop boxes, you could do that, of course, too. Now over here, we can create new relationships along the row in a Zachman-Like-Matrix. Yeah, of course I didn't do anything. In a Zachman-Like-Matrix, relationships are either horizontal along a row or vertical, used for audit, or what's called alignment vertically. And so that allows you to create a relationship restricted to a row. You can also customize an application and access it from that button, so that if you have, for instance, the need to display an application for executives to manage the data that as executives they're interested in without cluttering up all the details of server 23 and etc. You can do that, and you can produce those in any number of tools. The database is open for you to do that. Now, Hypercube contains all these functions. Let's go over the work function. Meetings. When you want to manage work in enterprise architecture, one of the challenges is managing meetings for your enterprise architecture governance. You want to track your meetings, what decisions you made, which architects attended. Now, that's only the architects in the system. If you wanted to note external attendees, there's a place for that, for instance. Work orders are where you tell a team of architects to build a particular architecture. So an example is the AV1 or AV2 of DODAF, or the equivalent in TOGAF, but this does it for whatever you've got. Assignments are where you tell a particular architect to do a particular artifact within the architecture. You also have tactics used in the architecture and a team log stating your status And here's the work order text for the different sections of the work order. Change requests are when you have made an error in an artifact and somebody notices it perhaps in a meeting or perhaps not, and ask for a change of that artifact to correct the error. You can specify what to change, and somebody will pick that up later and change it. You can also, that person who picks it up and changes it can then take an action, record an action against it saying that it's done, and eventually you can identify that it's complete. Issues have to do with the meta-architecture, which is the architecture of how we do architecture, or the methods and practices you are using, which hopefully become more mature over time. And again, you can identify issues with the artifacts in the meta-architecture and then continuously improve in fixing those issues. Here is a quick assessment of how mature you are. Using the 5 activities mechanism. And here is another using longer one, the longer form, using the Enterprise Architecture Maturity Management Framework from GAO with 40 questions. And then you can produce reports and show those off the reports menu. Also, you can again check your work context. I'll show you why that's useful. We have an extensive parameter system, and what that does is tracks all these kinds of parameters, and the effective parameters then take the default parameters and everything subsequent to them more and more narrow for your particular circumstance, and it overlays them so that the more narrow, the more specific value of the parameter is what's applied in this particular circumstance. Let me give you an example to make that concrete. Here I have hot pink. Oh, where did that come from? Let's see. Did come from here. The default was light salmon. Oh, look at that. Someone had identified that for this particular matrix, we're going to change that color to hot pink. Okay, so you can also look at what's called the master form, and that will tell you for some particular parameter. What you're going to use. So these get overlaid and then they are applied to your artifacts and to your working environment. Let's see, where were we? You can also configure the suite. You can configure the things about architects, what architects are in your system, what teams, so you can assign them to work, what skills each architect has, which is actually a security mechanism that assures that architects that have no skills in a particular domain don't go in and change the data if you want to use it. The applications, again, this is the first of a suite of applications, so if you want to restrict which applications a particular architect can use, you can do that here. Roles. Each architect has a role which has to do specifically with the Zachman-Matrices, and you can either restrict the columns or the rows so that they can't change data. So if you have some particular guy who's not really an architect, for instance, but he's a business user who contributes to the architecture, you can restrict which rows they can contribute to so that they don't go entering things they are not the authority for. Architectures, you can show all the architectures in the enterprise. You can show the different types of architecture, and for each type, again, this is all test data. For each type, you can have recommendations, so when you create a new one, you know which artifacts by default you might want to stick in there. And for an architecture, you can identify the seeds. Now seeds, for instance, if you're going to do a system architecture, the seed for the architecture, one of the seeds would be the component in the correct row that would be the system, and then everything underneath that, contained within it, would automatically get populated. That's the purpose of seeds. Now all those functions don't happen here in Hypercube, but there's another application coming to use that data, or you can create a custom one to use that data. In a ZMatrix, again, here's another means to configure, but this shows all the ZMatrices in the environment. Here, columns, we have it restricted to this matrix, but you can add others. Rows, cells, so the artifacts invoked by a cell. The cell primitives, again, this is for the managing the environment. The relationships available in a cell, in a row, in the matrix. The parameters for the matrix. The domain that the matrix appears in. For instance, SABSA appears in security and privacy, and the scale at which the matrix is applicable. For instance, some are applicable to solution architecture, some are applicable to enterprise architecture, and there's a couple of reference levels for hard science and soft science as well. If you want to derive your rules, you can do that by deriving them from science and reference that. Okay, then there's some other functions. You can change artifact types. That's common. You can change component subtypes. This is metadata. You can change domains, and you can view the domains. You can view the scales. Here's the steps in the architecture process. You can change those for local practice. Here's the tactics you might use. You can change that for local practice again. And here's a form to initialize the or reinitialize the application back to some factory settings. Retain some of the more delicate configurations you've created, but it will ensure that the thing runs. So that's about it. There's a glossary. I showed you the about form. The glossary controls the semantic problem of enterprise architecture of defining common terms that architects all use the same way. And that's the whole of it. That's what this does. Again, it's focused on the 80% of the work of managing the data, not the fraction of the 10% of the work, which is producing drawings. So as a result, it may be very useful to you if you're in the middle of an enterprise architecture process in a large organization and you recognize the problem of managing all that data. This is the application for you. I don't know that there are many more like it. This may be the first, and it will be free. Again, it's the alpha test version. There will be a beta test version, and then there will be a production version, and the production version will be free. I can't say that all of the other applications in the series will also be free. They may have some cost, because ultimately you have to be able to support the effort and keep this thing a viable effort, self-supporting. But this will be free, and you can use it with either the other applications that we produce, or you can wire it up to work with whatever tools you are already using in your environment. For instance, if you're using the free tool Archie, you can build an importer and exporter to import and export to Archie. Again, you can customize reports, you can customize which tools you're using. You can do all of that. That's about it. I hope this has been useful to you. Thank you for your time.